In the dim, flickering candlelight of a 1990s convent chapel in rural New Mexico, Sister Lucia knelt before the altar, her habit soaked in shadows that seemed to writhe like living serpents. The air was thick with the scent of incense and aged wood, but tonight it carried something else. A faint, acrid whisper of smoke, as if the very walls were exhaling a secret long buried. Her lips moved in silent prayer, but her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed not on the crucifix but on the small ornate vial clutched in her trembling hand. "The fire of purification," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread unraveling in the silence. And then, with a gesture both reverent and resolute, she tilted the vial, letting the accelerant spill like holy oil across the sacred cloths, the wooden pews, the ancient relics that had stood witness to decades of whispered confessions. Flames erupted not with a roar, but with a sigh, a soft, insidious crackle that devoured the heart of the convent in minutes, turning sanctuary into inferno. Screams echoed through the night, not just from the sisters fleeing the blaze, but from something deeper, something unspoken. The unraveling of a mind convinced that destruction was divine will. Imagine the chill that crawls up your spine as you hear those first cries, not of pain but of bewildered betrayal, a place of peace, reduced to ashes by one of its own. Fear grips you, doesn't it? The kind that questions every locked door, every shadowed corner of your own life. But woven into that terror is intrigue, a magnetic pull toward the why. How does a woman sworn to a life of serenity become the architect of such chaos? Empathy stirs too, unbidden, for the fragile vessel of faith that shattered under invisible pressures, leaving us to wonder if we've all got a breaking point lurking in the quiet recesses of our souls. And horror, oh the horror, settles like ash in your throat, because this isn't just a fire. It's a mirror held up to the unpredictable fury of the human mind, where piety and madness entwine like thorns on a crown. Yet, beneath this blaze lies a secret so profoundly disturbing that it was hushed even by those who survived the flames. A hidden truth, unearthed only in fragmented psychiatric evaluations and sealed church archives, that doesn't just explain the arson, but redefines the boundaries of sanity, faith, and the shadows we invite into our lives under the guise of salvation. What if the voices Sister Lucia claimed were from God weren't divine at all, but echoes of a trauma so buried it masqueraded as prophecy? What if the convent's destruction was less an act of zeal and more a desperate bid to silence a predator who walked its halls undetected for years? And the most chilling question of all, in a world where the line between holy revelation and hallucinatory dissent blurs, how do we know when our own whispers turn treacherous? These enigmas dangle like embers in the dark, unresolved, pulling you deeper into a tunnel where the light at the end might be another illusion. This case, drawn from the veiled annals of American monsters, exposes the fragility of morality like a cracked stained glass window, beautiful until the light reveals the fractures beneath. It whispers of the human mind's unpredictability, how a single fracture can spiderweb into catastrophe, reminding us that vulnerability isn't a weakness reserved for others. It's the quiet undercurrent in us all, waiting for the spark that ignites the unthinkable. Evil doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives cloaked in prayer, and in facing it, we confront our own precarious perch on the edge of normalcy. How exposed does that make you feel, knowing that the divine and the deranged can share the same confessional? Now, in this moment of shared unease, let's forge a connection across the screen. If this glimpse into the abyss has stirred something in you, a resolve to chase these shadows to their source, hit that like button, not just for the algorithm, but to summon more souls into this circle, unveiling the dark and inexplicable psychiatric labyrinths that society prefers to forget. And in the comments below, type these exact words: "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing so, you're not just engaging, you're pledging allegiance to the unraveling, becoming a thread in the tapestry of those who dare to probe what others avert their eyes from. It's a quiet pact, this community of truth seekers, bound by the thrill of the forbidden and the catharsis of comprehension. You've already proven your mettle by tuning in. Congratulations, seeker. You're among the rare few who don't flinch at the first flicker of flame. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The flames had barely subsided into smoldering ruins when Father Elias arrived at the convent's gates, his old sedan crunching over the gravel path still warm from the night's inferno. It was early 1992, in the desolate outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the desert winds carried whispers of isolation, and the convent of Santa Maria de las Sombras had stood as a beacon of quiet devotion for over half a century. The air hung heavy with the stench of charred wood and melted wax, a profane perfume that clashed with the sacred ground it desecrated. Father Elias, a diocesan investigator dispatched from the archdiocese in Santa Fe, stepped out with a mix of pastoral concern and clerical duty etched on his weathered face. He had been roused from sleep by a frantic call from the local sheriff. One survivor, Sister Lucia, found wandering the desert roads at dawn, her habit singed but intact, murmuring prayers in a trance-like state. The other sisters, 7 in total, had perished in the blaze, their bodies later identified through dental records and the faint outlines of rosaries fused to their remains. But it was Lucia's condition that unsettled him most. She claimed, the fire was God's judgment, a purifying pyre to cleanse the convent of the serpent's nest. As Father Elias pushed through the police cordon, his boots sinking into the ash-saturated earth, he noticed something anomalous amid the wreckage, a small, locked wooden chest, half buried under a collapsed beam, its iron clasps miraculously unwarped by the heat. The firefighters had dismissed it as debris, but Elias's eye, trained in the subtle artifacts of faith, caught the engraved insignia, a coiled serpent devouring its tail, an Ouroboros symbol rarely seen in Catholic iconography, more akin to esoteric traditions the Church had long suppressed. With gloved hands, he pried it open under the watchful eyes of detectives, revealing not relics or scriptures, but a cache of yellowed letters, faded photographs, and a leather-bound journal inscribed with Lucia's name. The discovery sent a ripple through the investigation. These weren't devotional writings, but fragmented confessions hinting at a convent life far removed from serene prayer. One letter, dated 1987, spoke of midnight visitations by a shadowy figure the sisters called the Confessor, a man who entered under the veil of spiritual guidance but left trails of unspoken dread. Father Elias's heart pounded as he leafed through the pages, the desert sun casting long shadows that seemed to dance mockingly around him. The journal entries began innocently enough. Lucia's arrival in 1985 as a young novice from a troubled family in Texas, seeking solace in the cloistered life after a childhood marred by her father's alcoholism and her mother's descent into paranoia. But as the years progressed, the writings darkened. Lucia described vivid dreams of fire raining from heaven, voices urging her to burn away the corruption, and a growing conviction that the convent harbored a profound evil. One entry chilled him. The confessor comes in the confessional shadow, his words like venom, twisting Sister Agnes's faith until she wept bloodless tears. I see it now. Satan wears the collar of a priest. Accompanying sketches depicted hooded figures and serpentine forms entwining crucifixes, drawn with a fervor that blurred the line between art and obsession. Photographs showed the sisters in group poses, their smiles strained, with one recurring face absent from later images. A stern abbess who had vanished mysteriously in 1989, rumored to have been reassigned but never confirmed. Word of the chest spread quickly, drawing skepticism from law enforcement who viewed it as the ramblings of a pyromaniac nun. Yet Elias, steeped in the Church's history of suppressed scandals, sensed a deeper malaise. He interviewed the few townsfolk who interacted with the convent, delivering supplies, hearing distant chants, and uncovered whispers of unusual occurrences. Sisters seen pacing the grounds at odd hours, their eyes hollow, strange lights flickering in the chapel long after curfew, and a deliveryman who once glimpsed a man in clerical garb slipping away through a back gate, his face obscured. The discovery propelled the case beyond simple arson into a psychiatric enigma. prompting the Archdiocese to involve a discreet forensic psychologist, Dr. Miriam Hale, under the guise of spiritual counseling. As Elias sealed the chest for transport to Santa Fe, he couldn't shake the feeling that opening it had unleashed something, a Pandora's box of repressed memories and institutional cover-ups that Lucia's fire had inadvertently illuminated. Back in the makeshift command post, a dusty community hall on the reservation's edge, Lucia was placed under observation. She sat motionless, her hands folded in perpetual prayer, but her gaze darted to unseen presences, whispering, "The flames revealed the truth. The serpent still coils." Dr. Hale's initial assessment noted classic signs of dissociative episodes, possibly triggered by prolonged isolation and unaddressed trauma, but the journal's contents suggested something more insidious, a collective delusion fostered within the convent's walls. Elias pored over the artifacts that night, the weight of secrecy pressing on him like the desert's unrelenting heat. One photograph tucked in the journal's back showed Lucia as a novice, standing beside the missing abbess, both illuminated by candlelight with expressions of eerie serenity. Behind them, faint in the shadows, was the Ouroboros etched into a confessional booth, a symbol Elias recalled from obscure Vatican warnings about cults masquerading as Orthodox orders. The unexpected discovery of the chest became the case's fulcrum, shifting suspicions from lone madness to a web of hidden influences. Father Elias forwarded copies to the Archdiocese, only to receive orders to classify them as internal spiritual matters, a directive that fueled his unease. Meanwhile, Lucia's mutterings grew more coherent, alluding to the confessor's pact that bound the sisters in silence. Detectives combing the ruins found traces of accelerant not just in the chapel, but in the abbess's old quarters, suggesting premeditation tied to personal vendettas. As the sun set on that ash-choked day, Elias realized the fire hadn't destroyed evidence. It had preserved it, forcing the light of scrutiny into corners the church had long kept veiled. The journal's final entry, scrawled in frantic script, read, "The voices are not God's alone. They echo the confessor's lies. To save us, I must burn it all." In that moment, the discovery transformed grief into suspicion, pulling the threads of a larger tapestry where faith, fear, and fabrication intertwined, setting the stage for revelations that would test the very foundations of trust in sacred institutions. The weight of those pages lingered, a silent accusation against the piety that masked deeper fractures. Lucia's act, once dismissed as fanaticism, now hinted at a desperate rebellion against an unseen oppressor, her mind fracturing under pressures that no vow could withstand. Father Elias drove back to Santa Fe with the chest in his trunk, the road stretching endlessly under starless skies, each mile amplifying the dread that this was merely the spark, the real blaze of truth yet to come. As Father Elias's sedan merged onto the empty highway toward Santa Fe, the chest in the trunk seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its contents a Pandora's trove that refused to stay silent. The desert night enveloped him, stars piercing the velvet sky like accusatory eyes, while the journal's words replayed in his mind, echoes of a confessor whose presence tainted the convent's sanctity. By the time he reached the Archdiocese offices the next morning, fatigue had etched deeper lines into his face, but resolve burned brighter. He handed the artifacts to Bishop Harlan, a stern figure whose tenure spanned decades of quiet resolutions to ecclesiastical embarrassments. The bishop's chambers, lined with leather-bound tomes and crucifixes of polished silver, felt oppressively close as they pored over the documents under the glow of a desk lamp. Harlan's brow furrowed at the Ouroboros symbol, muttering about heretical influences that the church had battled since the Inquisition. Yet his insistence on discretion, sealing the files under canonical confidentiality, only heightened Elias's suspicions that the confessor was no phantom, but a flesh-and-blood specter with ties to the hierarchy. Dr. Miriam Hale arrived that afternoon. Her expertise in religious psychopathology sought to bridge the gap between faith and forensics. A no-nonsense academic from the University of New Mexico, she specialized in cases where devotion blurred into delusion, her own background as a lapsed Catholic lending a skeptical edge to her analyses. Seated in a dimly lit conference room surrounded by the chest's spilled secrets, she began dissecting Lucia's journal with clinical precision. Entries from 1986 detailed her initial enchantment with the convent. The rhythmic chants, the communal meals under starlit patios, the sense of family absent from her fractured youth. But by 1988, the tone shifted, subtle at first, like a dissonant note in a hymn. Lucia wrote of the confessor's arrivals, always at dusk, his sermons laced with metaphors of serpents and redemption that left the sisters unsettled. His eyes, one passage read, hold the abyss, promising absolution but delivering chains. Sister Clara confided in me last night. She dreams of his touch, not holy but binding. Photographs corroborated this. Group shots where the sisters' postures grew rigid over time, their gazes averted from an unseen presence. Hale cross-referenced the dates with church records, uncovering anomalies. The missing abbess, Mother Superior Renata, had indeed been reassigned in 1989, but no destination was listed, only a vague notation of spiritual retreat. Further digging revealed transfer orders signed by a Father Dominic Voss, a name that matched descriptions of the confessor in Lucia's sketches. Tall, silver-haired with a voice like velvet over gravel, Voss had been a visiting confessor from a distant parish, his visits irregular but impactful, often coinciding with reports of heightened emotional distress among the nuns. Hale's notes filled pages, possible signs of coercive control, where authority figures exploit isolation to instill dependency and fear. She theorized that Lucia's voices, initially interpreted as divine, might stem from internalized trauma, amplified by the convent's echo chamber of repression. One letter, penned by Sister Agnes in 1990 and hidden in the chest, alluded to confessions that steal the soul, hinting at manipulations that eroded personal boundaries without overt confrontation. As the investigation deepened, Elias and Hale interviewed former associates of the convent. A retired groundskeeper living in a trailer on the reservation's fringe recalled Voss's comings and goings. He'd arrive in a black sedan, always carrying a leather case, like a doctor of sins. The sisters changed after his visits, quieter, eyes downcast, as if carrying invisible weights. The man's tales wove a tapestry of unease, nocturnal gatherings in the chapel, chants that deviated from standard liturgy, incorporating phrases about eternal cycles reminiscent of the Ouroboros. Hale connected this to psychological grooming, where repetitive symbols embed subconscious triggers, fostering a shared delusion among the isolated group. Lucia, as the youngest and most impressionable, became the focal point, her journal evolving into a chronicle of dissent. Dreams of fire as purification, voices blending Voss's sermons with biblical apocalypse. By week's end, a breakthrough emerged from diocesan archives, a dusty file on Voss, flagged for doctrinal irregularities in the 1970s. He had been investigated for incorporating Gnostic elements into teachings, viewing sin as a cyclical force to be embraced rather than absolved. Reprimanded but not defrocked, he vanished from records after 1991, just before the fire. Hale's psychological profile painted him as a charismatic narcissist, potentially using the convent as a personal fiefdom to experiment with mind control under religious guise. Lucia's mutterings during sessions with Hale reinforced this. He whispered the serpent's truth, that redemption comes through destruction, that the old must burn for the new to rise. The doctor's reports noted dissociative identity traits in Lucia, where voices manifested as protective altars shielding her from Voss's influence. Yet, the whispers extended beyond Voss. A coded entry in Renata's handwriting, deciphered by Hale using biblical numerology, suggested a pact among the superiors to conceal Voss's activities, fearing scandal that could dismantle the order. This revelation stirred conflict within Elias. His faith, once unshakable, now quivered under the weight of institutional complicity. As they sealed the archives for the night, the room's shadows seemed to lengthen, mirroring the elongating doubts in their minds. Lucia, transferred to a psychiatric ward in Albuquerque, began responding to therapy, her fragmented recollections hinting at Voss's final visit in late 1991, a confrontation that precipitated her breakdown. The air in the ward carried the faint echo of her prayers, now mingled with pleas for forgiveness, as if the archive's secrets had awakened ghosts that refused to rest. The investigation's momentum built, pulling Elias and Hale into a vortex of moral ambiguity. What began as a recovery of artifacts evolved into an excavation of buried manipulations, where the confessor's shadow loomed larger, threatening to engulf not just the convent's legacy, but the church's veneer of infallibility. As Hale prepared her preliminary report, Elias stared at a photograph of Voss, his smile enigmatic, eyes holding secrets that begged to be unraveled further. Elias's gaze lingered on the photograph of Father Dominic Voss, the man's enigmatic smile a cipher that mocked the sterile confines of the archdiocese office. The image, grainy from years of archival neglect, captured Voss in mid-sermon, his hands raised as if conjuring rather than blessing, with a backdrop of stained glass windows that distorted light into serpentine patterns. It was late 1992 now, months after the fire, and the investigation had stagnated under layers of bureaucratic inertia. But Hale's report refused to gather dust. Her analysis posited Voss as the linchpin, a manipulator whose Gnostic leanings had infiltrated the convent like insidious roots, twisting devotion into dependency. Elias, torn between loyalty to the church and an emerging sense of justice, decided to pursue Voss's trail independently, venturing into the shadowy underbelly of ecclesiastical history that few dared to navigate. He began with discreet inquiries among retired clergy, men whose memories were vaults of unspoken scandals, hoping to unearth the confessor's origins without alerting the bishop. His first lead came from Father Ramon, an octogenarian priest in a nursing home on the outskirts of Taos, whose trembling hands clutched a rosary as he recounted Voss's early days. He arrived in the diocese in the late 1970s, Ramon whispered, his voice a rasp against the hum of fluorescent lights, from some obscure seminary in Europe, carrying books on ancient heresies. Charismatic, yes, drew crowds with talks of cycles of sin and rebirth. But there was a darkness. He'd hold private retreats and participants returned, changed. Eyes glazed, as if they'd glimpsed something beyond the veil. Ramon's tales painted Voss as a wanderer, assigned to remote parishes where oversight was minimal, his sermons blending Catholic doctrine with esoteric symbolism. The Ouroboros, Ramon explained, was Voss's favored motif, a symbol of eternal recurrence, where destruction preceded renewal, a philosophy that resonated dangerously in isolated communities like Santa Maria de las Sombras. Meanwhile, in the psychiatric ward where Lucia resided, Dr. Hale conducted sessions that peeled back layers of her fractured psyche with the delicacy of an archaeologist uncovering relics. The room was sparse, a metal bed, a window barred against the desert expanse, and a tape recorder capturing every murmur. Lucia, medicated to temper her episodes, spoke in halting fragments, her voice a fragile bridge over abyssal gaps in memory. He came to us as a shepherd, she began one afternoon, sunlight slanting through the bars like accusatory fingers. But his words coiled around our thoughts. In confession, he'd ask not for sins but for dreams, pulling them out like threads until we unraveled. Hale noted the dissociative patterns, Lucia's voices manifesting as internal dialogues, protective mechanisms against Voss's psychological intrusions. One session revealed a pivotal event, a 1988 retreat where Voss led the sisters in meditative exercises, inducing trance states that blurred reality and hallucination. Lucia's recollections deepened the mystery. During these retreats, Voss introduced rituals involving circular chants, mirroring the Ouroboros, designed to break the cycle of repression. Sisters reported visions of fiery purges, echoes that lingered in their subconscious like dormant seeds. For Lucia, whose childhood traumas left her vulnerable, these sessions amplified buried fears, her father's rages manifesting as demonic presences, her mother's paranoia as divine warnings.
He said the serpent devours its tail to be reborn, Lucia confided, her eyes distant.
That our pains were illusions to be burned away. Hale's therapy uncovered suppressed memories, Voss's private audiences with individual nuns, where he employed hypnotic suggestions disguised as prayer, fostering a cult-like allegiance. Sister Clara, one of the deceased, had confided in Lucia about feeling bound by invisible oaths, a sentiment echoed in the hidden letters. Elias, piecing together Ramon's anecdotes with Hale's insights, traveled to Voss's last known parish in Gallup, a fading town where the church steeple pierced the horizon like a forgotten sentinel. The rectory, now abandoned, yielded dusty ledgers detailing Voss's tenure, unexplained transfers of funds to obscure accounts, visitor logs showing repeat guests from fringe religious groups. A local librarian, intrigued by Elias's queries, produced clippings from the 1980s, articles on mystical revivals led by Voss, attended by seekers disillusioned with mainstream faith. One report hinted at a scandal, a young parishioner claiming Voss's therapeutic confessions induced nightmarish visions, leading to her institutionalization. The parallels to Lucia were uncanny, suggesting a pattern of targeting the emotionally fragile, molding their psyches into vessels for his ideology. Back in Albuquerque, Hale's sessions with Lucia reached a turning point. Under guided imagery, Lucia relived Voss's final visit in November 1991, a tense confrontation in the chapel where he demanded loyalty amid rumors of an impending diocesan audit. He spoke of the end times, Lucia murmured, tears tracing her cheeks, that the convent must be sacrificed to break the cycle. His eyes, they held the fire. This revelation aligned with forensic evidence, traces of Voss's DNA found on a charred confessional cloth, overlooked initially but now pivotal. Hale theorized that Voss's influence created a shared psychotic disorder, folie à plusieurs, where Lucia internalized his apocalyptic rhetoric as personal mandate. The voices, she posited, were echoes of Voss's manipulations, amplified by isolation and unresolved grief. Elias's pursuit intensified. A tip from Ramon led to a storage unit in Las Cruces, rented under Voss's alias. Inside, amid moth-eaten boxes, were tapes, recordings of sessions with various groups, Voss's voice hypnotic, weaving narratives of destruction as salvation. One tape, labeled Sombras 1990, captured a group meditation, sisters' voices rising in unison, chanting phrases that mirrored Lucia's journal. The discovery electrified the investigation, providing auditory proof of Voss's methods. Yet it also deepened the enigma. Voss had vanished post-fire, his trail cold, leaving questions of whether he orchestrated the blaze remotely, or if Lucia acted as his unwitting proxy. As Elias transcribed the tapes under the dim light of his study, the confessor's shadow elongated, casting doubt on every sacred vow. Hale, reviewing the audio with Lucia, watched as recognition flickered in her eyes, a mix of horror and relief, as if naming the darkness diminished its hold. The sessions grew more coherent, Lucia piecing together how Voss's whispers eroded the convent's harmony, turning sister against sister in subtle rivalries. The macabre dance of influence and illusion continued, each revelation pulling them closer to the heart of the mystery, where the line between perpetrator and victim blurred into an infinite loop. The tapes from the Las Cruces storage unit hummed to life in Elias's cramped study, Voss's voice emerging like a specter from the static, smooth, insistent, guiding listeners through labyrinths of metaphor that promised enlightenment but delivered entanglement. It was mid-1993, the New Mexico spring blooming indifferently around the archdiocese, where crocuses pushed through soil still tainted by the memory of ash. Elias replayed the Sombras 1990 recording obsessively, the sisters' chants rising and falling in hypnotic cadence, their words a blend of Latin psalms and Voss's invented litanies about cycles of decay and rebirth. One voice stood out, Lucia's, younger and unburdened then, her timbre carrying a purity that twisted Elias's gut with pity. The audio captured a moment of vulnerability, a sister faltering mid-chant, Voss's gentle correction steering her back, his tone paternal yet possessive. Elias paused the tape, rubbing his temples as the implications sank in. This wasn't mere heresy. It was a calculated erosion of wills, turning the convent into an echo chamber where individual thoughts dissolved into collective trance. Dr. Hale, armed with transcripts from the tapes, intensified her sessions with Lucia in the ward's quiet consultation room, where the walls were painted a soothing beige that did little to mask the undercurrent of institutional despair. Lucia, her habit replaced by a simple gown, sat with hands clasped, her fingers tracing invisible rosaries as if seeking anchor in the familiar. The visions came after the retreats, she confessed during one overcast morning, rain pattering against the window like hesitant applause. Hale encouraged her with nods, her notebook filling with observations. Lucia's eyes glazing over as she described apparitions of serpents coiling around altars, flames licking at the edges of her dreams without consuming. These weren't random hallucinations, Hale deduced. They were scripted residues from Voss's sessions, where guided imagery planted seeds of apocalyptic fervor. A particular vision haunted Lucia, a hooded figure, Voss, she now recognized, extending a chalice filled with purifying fire, urging her to drink and awaken to the true cycle. As therapy progressed, fractured memories surfaced like shards from a shattered mosaic. Lucia recalled the abbess, Mother Renata, confronting Voss in 1989, her voice raised in the refectory over whispers of doctrinal deviation. She vanished soon after, Lucia murmured, her gaze fixed on the floor. Transferred, they said, but I saw the fear in her eyes, like she knew the serpent's bite. Hale cross-referenced this with the archives. Renata's file contained a sealed letter to the bishop, alluding to unorthodox practices that threatened the sister's spiritual health. The doctor's profile of Lucia evolved. What began as suspected schizophrenia shifted toward complex post-traumatic stress, where Voss's manipulations mimicked familial abuses from her past, blurring authority figures into monolithic threats. In group dynamics, Hale explained to Elias over coffee in a dimly lit diner, such influencers create dependency loops, rewards of belonging interspersed with fears of expulsion, fostering visions as shared coping mechanisms. Elias, driven by the tape's revelations, expanded his search beyond church channels, consulting a network of investigative journalists who specialized in religious undercurrents. One contact, a reporter from the Albuquerque Journal named Carla Ruiz, met him in a park under cottonwood trees shedding fluffy seeds like forgotten prayers. Ruiz had covered similar cases in the 1980s, charismatic leaders in fringe sects inducing mass delusions through isolation and suggestion. Voss fits the pattern, she said, handing over a dossier of clippings. Articles on renewal movements where participants reported vivid, synchronized visions post-retreat. One story detailed a California group in 1984, led by a Voss associate, where members envisioned fiery rebirths leading to a collective breakdown. Ruiz's insights illuminated Voss's methodology, blending hypnosis with religious ecstasy, exploiting the brain's plasticity in deprived environments. Elias shared tape excerpts and Ruiz nodded knowingly. That's classic priming. The visions aren't spontaneous. They're planted narratives that take root in solitude. Back at the ward, Lucia's sessions yielded a breakthrough during a hypnotherapy trial, Hale guiding her through relaxation techniques that mirrored but subverted Voss's rituals. Under trance, Lucia relived a 1991 incident. Voss assembling the sisters in the chapel's undercroft, a dim cellar lit by candles casting elongated shadows. He spoke of fractured visions as portals to truth, distributing herbal teas that induced mild euphoria, blurring perception. Lucia described seeing the convent engulfed in flames not as destruction, but as a phoenix-like renewal, Voss's voice narrating the scene until it embedded as prophecy. It felt real, she whispered upon emerging, tears streaming. Like God's will, but now, it was his. Hale documented the physiological responses, elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, signs of recalled trauma triggering fight-or-flight echoes. This aligned with emerging psychiatric theories on induced false memories, where repetitive suggestion rewires neural pathways, making fabricated visions indistinguishable from reality. The fractured visions extended to other sisters' legacies, pieced from the chest's letters. Sister Agnes's missive described similar apparitions post-Voss's visits, dreams of serpents shedding skins, symbolizing rebirth through catastrophe. Hale theorized a folie imposée, where Voss, as the dominant personality, imposed delusions on the vulnerable group, with Lucia as the most receptive conduit. Elias, correlating this with Ruiz's dossier, uncovered Voss's European roots. A seminary in Italy, where he studied under a defrocked theologian known for esoteric experiments. A faded postcard in the storage unit confirmed it. Postmarked 1975, depicting an Ouroboros with Voss's handwriting, the cycle begins anew. This personal artifact humanized Voss, revealing him not as a monster, but as a man ensnared by his own philosophies, perpetuating a chain of influence that ensnared others. As spring yielded to summer's heat, The vision's clarity sharpened the investigation's focus. Lucia, gaining lucidity, sketched her apparitions for Hale. Flames entwining crucifixes, serpents with Voss's eyes, artifacts that Elias added to the growing file. A tip from Ruiz led to a former acolyte of Voss's, now living reclusively in Santa Fe, who agreed to meet. Over herbal tea in a adobe courtyard, the man, gaunt, eyes shadowed, recounted Voss's vision quests, exercises designed to fracture the ego, revealing inner truths that often manifested as shared hallucinations. He believed in controlled chaos, the acolyte said, that breaking minds rebuilt them stronger, in his image. This corroborated Lucia's accounts, painting Voss as a psychological architect whose fractured visions were tools of dominion. The sessions and searches converged, weaving a narrative where visions weren't mere symptoms but instruments of control. Elias, poring over sketches late into the night, felt the weight of unseen eyes, Voss's legacy lingering like a persistent dream. Hale, preparing a comprehensive report, noted Lucia's progress, the voices fading as understanding dawned, a testament to resilience amid manipulation. Yet each revelation unearthed new fractures, hinting at Voss's broader network, pulling the threads tighter toward an elusive confrontation. The sketches Lucia had drawn under Hale's guidance lay scattered across Elias's desk like fragments of a shattered stained glass window, each depicting flames and serpents in haunting detail, their lines trembling with the residue of recalled terror. It was late summer 1993, the New Mexico heat shimmering off the archdiocese grounds like a mirage, distorting the boundaries between what was real and what Voss had conjured. Elias traced a finger over one image, a circle of hooded figures encircling a blazing altar, feeling the paper's texture as if it held the pulse of Voss's elusive network. The former acolyte's words echoed in his mind. Controlled chaos, minds rebuilt in Voss's image. This hint of a broader web propelled Elias beyond solitary pursuits. He reached out to a clandestine group of reformist clergy, men and women disillusioned with the church's opacity, who met in shadowed cafes and exchanged encrypted missives about unchecked influences within the fold. One such contact, Sister Elena from a distant order in Colorado, responded to his query with caution, her letter arriving in a plain envelope marked only with a biblical verse. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Elena's correspondence unveiled the first tangible thread of Voss's network, a loose affiliation of like-minded clerics who dabbled in syncretic teachings, blending Catholicism with ancient mysticism under the banner of renewal circles. She described gatherings in remote retreats during the 1980s, where Voss emerged as a pivotal figure, his charisma drawing participants from across states. He spoke of echoes, Elena wrote, her script neat yet urgent. How one soul's fracture resonates through many, creating symphonies of shared revelation. Elias cross-verified this with Ruiz, the journalist, who dug into public records, tax filings for non-profit spiritual study groups linked to Voss, with addresses in Arizona and Utah, places where similar reports of psychological distress had surfaced among attendees. One group, the Circle of Eternal Return, listed Voss as a consultant in 1987 documents, its mission statement eerily mirroring Lucia's journal, purification through cyclical trials. Meanwhile, in the psychiatric ward, Hale's comprehensive report took shape, a meticulously bound dossier that wove Lucia's progress with evidentiary strands from the tapes and sketches. Sessions had evolved. Lucia now actively dissected her memories, her voice gaining strength as the voices within diminished. During a humid afternoon with thunder rumbling distantly like unspoken judgments, she recounted a pivotal echo from 1990. A letter circulated among the sisters, ostensibly from the abbess but bearing Voss's stylistic flourishes. It urged us to meditate on the serpent's wisdom, Lucia said, her eyes clear for the first time in months, to embrace the echoes of our pains as paths to transcendence. Hale probed gently, uncovering how such missives fostered a network of subtle indoctrination, where sisters shared visions in confidential circles reinforcing each other's delusions. The doctor's notes highlighted the phenomenon, a ripple effect, where one influenced mind amplified others, creating a psychic echo chamber insulated by the convent's walls. Elias, emboldened by Elena's leads, traveled to a faded motel in Flagstaff, Arizona, where a defunct retreat center stood abandoned amid pine forests, its sign weathered to illegibility. Accompanied by Ruiz for safety, he explored the site under cover of dusk, flashlights cutting through dust-laden air thick with the scent of decay. Inside, they found remnants, faded murals of Ouroboros symbols, stacks of pamphlets echoing Voss's rhetoric, and a guest ledger listing names, including Mother Renata's, from a 1988 seminar. One entry caught Elias's breath, a notation beside Renata's name, initiated into the echo, followed by Voss's initials. Ruiz photographed everything, her camera clicks punctuating the silence like accusations. Back in her office, she connected dots. Several ledger names matched individuals who later reported psychiatric episodes, their symptoms mirroring Lucia's, voices urging transformative acts, visions of renewal through disruption. Hale integrated these findings into her sessions, using them to map Lucia's psyche against the network's blueprint. The echoes weren't just internal, Hale explained to Elias over a secure phone line, her voice laced with professional detachment masking underlying concern. They were communal, propagated through Voss's web like a virus of the mind. Lucia, confronting a pamphlet replica Hale presented, trembled with recognition. This was the seed. We read them in secret, feeling connected to something larger, but it was a trap. Therapy delved deeper. Lucia recalled overheard conversations between Voss and Renata, hints of financial ties binding the convent to his circles, donations funneled to obscure causes, perhaps to sustain the network's operations. Hale's report posited Voss as a hub in a decentralized system, where echoes of influence spread without direct command, relying on primed individuals to act autonomously. The investigation's scope widened. Elias contacted a psychologist in Utah who had treated a former Circle member, a laywoman whose visions led to a voluntary commitment in 1991. Over tea in a quiet library, she described Voss's techniques, echo exercises, where participants mirrored each other's narratives until distinctions blurred, fostering a collective unconscious ripe for suggestion. It felt empowering at first, she confided, her hands steady but eyes distant, like tapping into a hidden harmony. But then the echoes turned dissonant, urging isolation, sacrifice. This paralleled Lucia's descent, where convent routines became rituals amplifying Voss's planted ideas. Elias compiled a dossier of his own, cross-referencing with Hale's, revealing patterns, network members often from marginalized backgrounds, vulnerable to promises of belonging, their fractures exploited to perpetuate the cycle. As autumn leaves began to fall, symbolizing the shedding of old illusions, Lucia's lucidity peaked. In a session bathed in golden light, she sketched a web diagram, Voss at the center, lines radiating to sisters' retreats and unseen nodes. The echoes still whisper sometimes, she admitted, but now I recognize them as his, not heaven's. Hale noted this as a milestone. Cognitive restructuring, where understanding the network dismantled its hold. Elias, reviewing the diagram, felt a chill. One line pointed to an unnamed guardian within the diocese, suggesting complicity higher up. Ruiz's latest scoop, a leaked memo from 1985 warning of Voss's activities, ignored by superiors, fueled suspicions of institutional echoes. Where silence protected the web, the echoes reverberated, each discovery amplifying the macabre symphony of manipulation. Elias, driving back from Utah under starlit skies, pondered the network's resilience, how it persisted in shadows, its tendrils reaching into unsuspected corners. Hale, finalizing her report, emphasized resilience. Lucia's journey from conduit to critic exemplified the mind's capacity to reclaim itself. Yet the elusive confrontation loomed, Voss's absence a void that pulled inexorably, hinting at deeper layers where echoes might yet resound unchecked. The diagram Lucia sketched in the golden light of that autumn session lingered in Elias's mind like a spectral map, its lines radiating from Voss's central node to peripheral shadows, one labeled Guardian with a question mark that pulsed with unspoken implication. As 1993 waned into winter, snow blanketing the New Mexico landscape in a deceptive purity, Elias delved deeper into the diocese's undercurrents, his inquiries now shadowed by the leaked memo Ruiz had unearthed. A 1985 warning dismissed by superiors, its margins annotated with initials that matched Bishop Harlan's. The document cautioned against Voss's echo circles, labeling them as potential schisms, yet no action followed, suggesting a protective veil drawn over the network by those in power. Elias, wrestling with his vows of obedience, confided in Hale over encrypted calls, her voice a steady anchor amid his growing disillusionment. "The Guardian isn't a myth," she posited, drawing from Lucia's evolving recollections. "It's a role, someone shielding Voss from scrutiny, perhaps for mutual benefit." Hale's report, now a formidable tone-blending psychiatric analysis with evidentiary timelines, emphasized the network's resilience through such guardians, figures who monitored and mitigated exposures, ensuring the echoes persisted in subdued forms. In the ward where frost etched patterns on the windows like frozen secrets, Lucia's sessions focused on this veil. "There were letters," she murmured during a chilled morning, her breath fogging the air as she sipped tea, "from the bishop's office, praising Voss's work, encouraging his visits." Hale probed these memories, uncovering fragments of overheard discussions between Renata and a diocesan envoy, subtle assurances that Voss's methods, though unconventional, aligned with spiritual innovation. The doctor's notes evolved, the guardian as a psychological archetype, a gatekeeper whose complicity created cognitive dissonance in witnesses, blurring lines between allegiance and coercion. Lucia's diagram expanded under Hale's guidance. She added nodes for envoys and donors, her pencil strokes firmer, symbolizing her reclaiming of narrative control. Elias, armed with the memo, confronted Bishop Harlan in the opulent chambers where their journey began, the air thick with incense and unspoken tensions. Harlan's face, illuminated by firelight from the hearth, betrayed a flicker of unease as Elias presented the evidence. "These are old matters," the bishop deflected, his voice measured, resolved internally to preserve the flock's faith. But Elias pressed, citing the convent's fate as a consequence of ignored warnings, his words echoing the sisters' silenced pleas. Harlan's response unveiled partial truths. Voss had been flagged, but his contributions, financial inflows from affluent circle members, outweighed risks, a pragmatic veil drawn by fiscal guardians within the hierarchy. This revelation stirred Elias's internal conflict. The church, his lifelong sanctuary, now appeared as a labyrinth of compromises, where guardians protected not just doctrine, but donations. Ruiz, ever the tenacious ally, amplified the hunt by tapping her network of sources. A whistleblower from the Utah psychologist circle emerged, a former diocesan accountant living in seclusion near the Great Salt Lake. Meeting in a windswept cafe overlooking the saline expanse, the accountant shared ledgers photocopied in secret, transfers from Voss's groups to diocesan funds labeled as retreat endowments, with Harlan's approval stamped throughout the 1980s. The Guardian was a system, the accountant explained, his voice low against the clatter of dishes, layers of oversight that muffled alarms. Elias correlated this with Elena's letters. Her reformist group had documented similar patterns in other dioceses, where guardians, mid-level officials, facilitated unorthodox programs for their perceived benefits, veiling risks until crises erupted. In parallel, Hale's therapy with Lucia delved into the personal veils she had constructed, defenses against Voss's intrusions that manifested as dissociative barriers. During a session amid falling snow, Lucia recounted a 1990 encounter, an envoy from Santa Fe visiting the convent, his demeanor affable yet probing, inquiring about Voss's impact while subtly discouraging dissent. "He carried the bishop's seal," Lucia said, her eyes reflecting the wintry light, a veil of authority that made questions feel like betrayals. Hale interpreted this as institutional gaslighting, where guardians normalized anomalies, eroding trust in one's perceptions. Lucia's progress shone here. She articulated how these veils amplified her isolation, turning internal doubts into prophetic urgings. The voices, once commanding, now whispered faintly, their power diminished by exposure. Elias's dossier swelled with these insights, including a clandestine recording from the accountant, a 1989 meeting excerpt where Harlan discussed Voss's innovative outreach with enthusiasm, dismissing concerns as overzealous piety. This audio, grainy but damning, echoed the tapes from Las Cruces, linking personal manipulations to systemic enablers. Ruiz published an anonymized article in a niche journal, stirring ripples in ecclesiastical circles. Queries from other investigators, hints of parallel cases where guardians had shielded similar figures. One lead pointed to a retired envoy in Albuquerque, whose name appeared in the ledgers. Elias arranged a meeting in a quiet park, benches dusted with snow. The envoy, frail but sharp, admitted partial knowledge. We were told Voss brought renewal to stagnant orders, funds to struggling parishes. The veil was necessity. Scandal erodes faith more than silence. Hale wove these external veils into Lucia's internal landscape, using role-play exercises to simulate confrontations with guardians, empowering her to dismantle psychological barriers. The fire was my way of tearing the veil, Lucia reflected in a breakthrough session, tears mingling with resolve, but it consumed everything else. Hale's report underscored this. Veils as dual constructs, protective for the powerful, oppressive for the vulnerable, fostering environments where delusions flourished unchecked. Elias, reviewing the envoy's confessions, felt the weight of complicity. His own silence in early years now seemed a thread in the veil. A tip from Elena led to a hidden archive in Denver, a trove of correspondence revealing Guardian's communications, coded phrases about containing echoes to prevent diocesan fallout. As winter deepened, the veil began to fray under scrutiny. Lucia, nearing discharge eligibility, sketched a revised diagram. Guardians encircled like sentinels, but arrows now pointed outward, symbolizing exposure. Hale noted her client's empowerment. Understanding the system transformed victimhood into agency. Elias, compiling the archive's letters, uncovered a 1991 missive from Harlan to Voss, warnings of audits, suggestions to fade the echoes. This hinted at premeditation, Voss's disappearance perhaps orchestrated under the Guardian's directive. Ruiz's network buzzed with speculation. Anonymous tips flooded in, painting a national web where similar veils shrouded analogous networks. The revelations converged, each peeling layer exposing raw underbellies of power and protection. Elias, walking snow-laden paths back to his quarters, pondered the macabre irony. The convent's blaze, meant to purify, instead illuminated the veils, forcing guardians into the light. Hale, finalizing therapeutic notes, celebrated Lucia's resilience amid systemic shadows. Yet the elusive Voss remained a phantom, his network's echoes subdued but not silenced, pulling toward deeper confrontations where veils might yet conceal ultimate truths. The missive from Harlan to Voss, unearthed in the Denver archive amid stacks of yellowed correspondence, lay open on Elias's desk like a confessional secret finally voiced, its words a cryptic directive to fade the echoes just months before the convent's inferno. As winter's grip tightened on New Mexico in early 1994, frost veiling the windows of his modest quarters in a crystalline shroud, Elias felt the phantom's presence more acutely. Voss, no longer a mere name but a spectral force evading capture, his disappearance a deliberate vanishing act orchestrated under the Guardian's veil. The letter's ink, faded yet insistent, hinted at a premeditated retreat, perhaps to evade the audits Harlan alluded to, leaving Elias to ponder the depths of complicity that allowed such a figure to slip into obscurity. Hale's report, now shared discreetly with reformist allies, underscored the urgency. Voss's network, though frayed, could regenerate if its architect remained at large, his echoes persisting in the minds he had touched. Elias, sleepless under the weight of this pursuit, resolved to trace the phantom's trail, transforming his clerical duties into a clandestine hunt that blurred the boundaries of faith and fixation. Hale, observing Lucia's sessions in the ward where heaters hummed against the chill, noted her client's burgeoning resolve mirroring Elias's, a quiet determination to confront the source of her fractures. During a session blanketed by snowfall, Lucia gazed out at the white expanse, her voice steady as she recalled Voss's parting words in 1991. The cycle demands sacrifice, fade into the shadows, and rebirth awaits. Hale interpreted this as a coded farewell, perhaps instructing proxies while he orchestrated his own evasion. Therapy evolved into reconstruction. Lucia pieced together subtle clues from Voss's visits, mentions of sanctuaries beyond the desert, allusions to northern retreats where echoes could resonate anew. Hale's notes captured the emotional toll. Lucia's eyes, once haunted, now held a spark of agency, her pursuit of truth a mirror to Elias's external chase. Finding him might silence the last whispers, Lucia confided, her hands unclenching for the first time, symbolizing release from invisible bonds. Elias, collaborating with Ruiz, expanded the search northward, following leads from the accountant's ledgers. Withdrawals funneled to a property in Wyoming, a secluded cabin registered under a pseudonym linked to Voss's European seminary days. Driving through blizzard-swept highways, Elias's sedan cut a solitary path, the radio static echoing the Phantom's elusive signals. In Cheyenne, he met a local sheriff who had fielded odd reports in the late 1980s. Gatherings at the cabin, chants drifting on night winds, participants arriving in unmarked vans. Folks called it a prayer camp. The sheriff grunted over coffee in a diner fogged with steam. But some left shaken, talking of visions that wouldn't fade. Ruiz, digging digitally, uncovered property deeds cross-referenced with circle members' names, revealing a pattern of safe houses where Voss could relocate, perpetuating his influence in isolation. One deed bore Harlan's notary stamp, tightening the noose of guardianship around the Phantom's trail. Back in Albuquerque, Hale integrated these geographic echoes into Lucia's therapy, using maps to visualize Voss's potential paths, a therapeutic exercise that transformed abstract fears into tangible pursuits. He mentioned mountains, Lucia recalled under Hale's gentle prompting, the room warmed by a space heater's glow, places where the cycle renews in solitude. Hale's profile updated. Voss as a nomadic manipulator, his disappearances strategic withdrawals to regroup, leaving trails of influenced minds like breadcrumbs. Lucia's diagram, now pinned to the ward's bulletin board, extended northward, nodes marking suspected sanctuaries, her additions fueled by reclaimed memories. The emotional impact deepened. Lucia wept not from despair but catharsis, each revelation a step toward wholeness, her psyche mending as the Phantom's mystique eroded. Elias arrived at the Wyoming cabin under cover of dusk, snow crunching beneath his boots like fragile illusions shattering. The structure, weathered logs cloaked in white, exuded abandonment, but inside, remnants whispered of recent occupancy, dust-free books on Gnostic texts, a half-burned candle etched with Ouroboros, and a journal fragment echoing Voss's rhetoric. The Phantom evades, but the echo endures. Photographs scattered on a table depicted familiar faces, circle members from Ruiz's dossier, their expressions serene yet vacant. Elias pocketed evidence, his heart pounding with a mix of triumph and trepidation. The trail warm, Voss perhaps only steps ahead. Ruiz, receiving scanned images via fax, connected them to a 1992 sighting in Montana. A silver-haired man leading a small group in forested meditations. Reports dismissed as eccentric spirituality. Hale's sessions paralleled this pursuit. Lucia, inspired by updates Elias shared anonymously through Hale, envisioned confronting Voss, a hypothetical dialogue scripted in therapy to reclaim power. "What would you say?" Hale asked, notepad poised as Lucia paced the room. "That his cycles are illusions, chains I break," she replied, voice resonant with newfound conviction. The doctor's observations noted transference. Lucia projecting her healing onto the Phantom's capture, transforming personal recovery into a collective quest. Meanwhile, Elena's reformist network amplified the hunt, circulating Voss's description in underground bulletins, yielding tips from ex-members. A 1993 encounter in Idaho, Voss posing as a retreat facilitator, his sessions inducing familiar visions. The pursuit intensified. Elias, tracing the Montana lead, interviewed a participant in a cozy library amid towering bookshelves. The woman, eyes shadowed by lingering doubts, described Voss's evolved methods, subtler echoes, focusing on digital correspondences to maintain distance. "He spoke of phantoms within," she whispered, "urges that guide without presence." This revelation chilled Elias. Voss's adaptation suggested a network unbound by geography, his influence spectral, permeating through letters and calls. Ruiz uncovered phone records, calls from the Wyoming cabin to diocesan lines, including Harlan's. Post-1991, evidence of ongoing guardianship even in evasion. As spring thaw approached, melting veils of snow revealed hidden paths. Lucia neared release, her therapy culminating in a simulated pursuit exercise, walking the ward's corridors, metaphorically tracking Voss's steps. Hale celebrated this milestone. Resilience forged in chase, the mind's capacity to pursue phantoms until they materialize as conquerable fears. Elias, compiling the mounting evidence in a secure file, felt the trail converging, tips coalescing around a Colorado enclave where Voss might lurk. The emotional undercurrent surged. Each step forward unraveled knots of deception, pulling Elias and Lucia toward a reckoning where the phantom's intangibility dissolved into accountability. Yet, the chase unearthed deeper disturbances. Anonymous letters arriving at Elias's door, warnings to let echoes fade, echoing Harlan's missive, hints that guardians still shielded the trail. Ruiz's investigations faced obstacles, sources retracting statements, digital trails vanishing. In the ward, Lucia experienced fleeting resurgences of voices, triggered by news of Voss's proximity, testing her resolve. Hale adjusted therapy, reinforcing boundaries while Elias pondered the macabre endurance of influence, how phantoms persist not in body, but in the psyches they haunt. The pursuit, once solitary, now wove a tapestry of allied seekers, each driven by personal echoes, inching toward the enigma's core where confrontation awaited. The anonymous letters arriving at Elias's door, their warnings to let echoes fade, scripted in a hand that mimicked ecclesiastical cursive, served as harbingers rather than deterrents, fueling his resolve to pierce the phantom's lingering veil. As spring's tentative warmth thawed the Colorado landscape in 1994, wildflowers emerging like cautious witnesses from the soil, Elias followed the coalescing tips to a remote enclave nestled in the Rocky Mountains, a cluster of cabins masquerading as a spiritual retreat center, its sign reading Circle of Renewal in weathered paint. The drive from New Mexico wound through pine-shrouded passes, the air crisp with the scent of melting snow and evergreen, each twist in the road amplifying the sense of approaching a threshold where echoes might finally coalesce into form. Elias's hands gripped the wheel tightly, the dossier on the passenger seat a talisman against the isolation, its pages chronicling the network's tendrils now pointing unequivocally here. Hale's latest update, relayed via a payphone to evade potential surveillance, confirmed Lucia's fleeting resurgences, whispers that surged with news of proximity, testing her boundaries but ultimately strengthening her cognitive fortifications. Upon arrival, the enclave appeared deceptively serene. Log structures encircled a central fire pit, smoke curling lazily from chimneys as a handful of residents moved with purposeful calm, their attire simple robes that evoked monastic simplicity. Elias posed as a seeker disillusioned with urban faith, his clerical collar concealed beneath a woolen sweater, allowing him to blend into the communal rhythm. The leader, a woman named Miriam, coincidentally sharing Hale's first name, though no relation, welcomed him with a knowing smile, her eyes holding depths that suggested familiarity with veiled truths. "We embrace the cycle here," she intoned during orientation, her voice a soothing cadence that echoed Voss's recorded sermons, where endings birth beginnings in quiet reflection. Elias's observations sharpened. The daily routines mirrored those described in the tapes. Meditative circles at dawn, shared narratives around evening fires, symbols of Ouroboros etched into communal altars. Whispers among residents hinted at a founder who visited sporadically, his guidance disseminated through written directives that perpetuated the echoes without physical presence. Meanwhile, in the Albuquerque ward, Hale's sessions with Lucia navigated the emotional currents stirred by the pursuit's momentum. The room, now adorned with Lucia's evolving diagrams, felt less like a clinical space and more a war room for psychic reclamation. During a session under the slanting rays of afternoon sun, Lucia traced the Colorado node on her map, her finger lingering as if sensing vibrations through paper. The enclave. He mentioned it once as a haven where echoes harmonize, she revealed, her voice threaded with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. Hale encouraged exploration of these memories, uncovering layers where Voss's allusions to the site served as psychological anchors, promises of sanctuary that masked control. The doctor's updated profile portrayed the enclave as a nexus, a physical manifestation of the network, where influenced individuals congregated, their shared delusions reinforcing the phantom's legacy. Lucia's resurgences, Hale noted, were not regressions but echoes testing resolve, each confrontation diminishing their amplitude as understanding deepened. Elias immersed himself in the Enclave's life, participating in group reflections that unveiled subtle revelations. One evening around the crackling fire pit where flames danced like living memories, a resident named Thomas, gaunt, with eyes shadowed by past visions, shared a tale of the mentor's last visit in late 1992. Months after the convent's blaze, he spoke of purification through trial. Thomas murmured, the group nodding in unison, how one flame ignites many. Elias's pulse quickened. The description matched Voss, his silver hair and gravelly voice evoked in hushed reverence. Probing gently during private walks along forested trails, Elias learned of directives arriving via mail, envelopes postmarked from anonymous locations, containing meditations that induced trance-like states similar to Lucia's fractured visions. One such missive, glimpsed in Thomas's quarters under pretext of borrowing a book, bore phrases lifted from the Las Cruces tapes. Fade the self, embrace the cycle. This tangible link electrified Elias. The phantom was not dormant, but directing from afar. The Enclave, a living echo chamber sustaining his influence. Ruiz, monitoring from afar, fed Elias intel via coded postcards, seeming tourist mementos that concealed updates from her network. A breakthrough came from an ex-resident who had fled the Enclave in 1993, now living in Denver. Her account, relayed through Ruiz, described Voss's physical presence waning, but his psychological imprint enduring through guardians within the group, individuals like Miriam, who enforced the veils. They screen newcomers, the ex-resident explained in a transcribed interview, ensuring only those attuned to the echoes remain. Elias correlated this with Harlan's missives. The bishop's network extended here. Subtle fund transfers traced by the accountant supporting the Enclave's operations. The revelations compounded. The site wasn't merely a hideout but a laboratory for refined manipulations, where residents reported synchronized dreams, visions of renewal that blurred individual boundaries, fostering a collective psyche ripe for suggestion. Hale wove these Enclave insights into Lucia's therapy, presenting anonymized excerpts to stimulate recall. The harmonies. We practiced them in the convent too, Lucia responded, her eyes widening with recognition during a rain-lashed session, droplets tracing paths on the window like tears of revelation. Therapy delved into the Enclave's conceptual parallel, a microcosm where isolation amplified echoes, much like the convent's walls had. Lucia's emotional journey peaked here. She articulated the macabre allure, the sense of belonging that masked erosion, her mind's fractures now mending through narrative ownership. Hale's notes celebrated this. Revelations as therapeutic catalysts, transforming phantom pursuits into personal empowerments. Lucia sketched the Enclave's layout from fragmented memories, adding details Voss had shared in confidence, hidden paths, symbolic clearings, her contributions bridging the gap between internal echoes and external realities. Elias's stay culminated in a nocturnal discovery, sneaking into Miriam's office under moonlit cover, the Enclave silent save for distant owl calls. He uncovered a locked drawer yielding correspondence. Letters from Voss dated post-disappearance instructed on containing resurgences and veiling the source. Codes that mirrored warnings Elias had received. One envelope contained a photograph. Voss in the Enclave's fire pit circle, his face illuminated by flames, expression serene yet commanding. The image sent shivers through Elias. The phantom materialized, no longer spectral but documented. His evasion a calculated illusion. Photocopying key documents before retreating, Elias felt the weight of culmination. The Enclave's secrets unraveling threads that connected convent to network, guardian to phantom. As he prepared to depart, a conversation with Thomas yielded a final revelation. Voss's planned return in summer, a grand harmonization to realign the echoes. This timeline infused urgency. Elias relayed it to Ruiz and Hale, the web tightening around the enigma's core. Lucia, informed obliquely through therapy, experienced a surge of closure. Her voice is silenced in the face of impending confrontation. Hale's report expanded. The Enclave as a psychological fortress, its breaches exposing the fragility of manipulated minds. Elias drove away under dawning skies, the mountains receding like fading illusions, each revelation a step toward dispelling the shadows that had ensnared so many. Elias's sedan descended the mountain passes from the Colorado enclave, the engine's hum a counterpoint to the revelations churning in his mind. The photocopied letters, the photograph of Voss bathed in firelight, the whispers of a impending grand harmonization that promised to realign the network's echoes. Spring deepened into summer 1994, wildflowers giving way to the lush verdancy of aspens quivering in warm breezes, their leaves whispering secrets that mirrored the phantom's elusive directives. Elias felt the pull of culmination, the threads of investigation weaving toward a nexus where Voss's spectral influence might finally manifest in flesh. The Enclave's secrets had illuminated the machinery of manipulation, a self-sustaining cycle where residents, primed by missives and meditations, perpetuated delusions that bound them in invisible fellowship. Yet the discovery of Voss's planned return infused the pursuit with urgency, transforming passive revelations into active reckoning. Elias shared the intelligence with Ruiz via a secure drop, an envelope left in a Santa Fe library book, her network mobilizing to monitor the enclave discreetly. While Hale prepared Lucia for the emotional ripples such a confrontation might send through her recovering psyche. In the Albuquerque ward, now alive with the hum of air conditioners battling summer's heat, Hale's sessions with Lucia navigated the precipice of closure. The diagrams on the walls had evolved into intricate webs, nodes pulsing with annotated memories, the Colorado enclave marked as a potential fulcrum. During a sweltering afternoon, sunlight filtering through blinds in striped patterns like bars of unresolved doubt, Lucia sat with a composure that belied her inner turbulence. The harmonization. It's his way of closing the loop, she murmured, her fingers tracing the map's lines as if divining paths through ether. Hale guided her through visualization exercises, not to induce trances but to deconstruct them, imagining the enclave's circles. The flames dance and Voss's voice as mere constructs, dismantleable through awareness. The doctor's updated notes reflected Lucia's growth. The resurgences, once disruptive echoes, now served as diagnostic tools, their intensity waning as she articulated their origins in Voss's planted narratives. "I feel the cycle breaking within me," Lucia confided, her eyes meeting Hale's with a clarity forged in therapy's forge. But what if facing him reignites it? Elias, returning to Santa Fe, coordinated with Elena's reformist allies, their clandestine meetings in unassuming cafes where coffee steam veiled urgent whispers. One contact, a former diocesan insider now in seclusion, provided a crucial link, encrypted emails traced to Voss, routed through anonymous servers but originating near the enclave, containing instructions for the harmonization, a ritualistic gathering designed to synchronize visions across the network. Ruiz's digital sleuthing cracked partial codes, phrases about reciprocal rebirth, allusions to sacrificial metaphors that echoed Lucia's fiery mandate. Elias's dossier, now a voluminous binder straining at its seams, chronicled the reckoning's blueprint. Voss's adaptation from physical presence to remote orchestration, his phantom status a strategic evolution to evade capture while sustaining influence. A tip from the Denver ex-resident pinpointed the harmonization's date, midsummer solstice, a symbolically charged moment for cyclical renewal, drawing participants from scattered nodes. Hale integrated these temporal echoes into Lucia's therapy, using calendars to mark the approaching date, transforming anticipation into empowerment. "The reckoning isn't his to control," Hale affirmed, her voice a steady beacon amid Lucia's flickering doubts, as they role-played scenarios of confrontation, verbal dissections of Voss's rhetoric, affirmations of autonomy that silenced internal whispers. Lucia's recollection sharpened. Fragments of Voss's teachings on cycles as inevitable forces, now reframed as manipulative illusions, her mind's fractures sealing with each session. The emotional undercurrent swelled. Lucia wept tears of release, not despair, her journey from conduit of chaos to architect of her own narrative a testament to resilience. Hale's report, shared with Elias in encrypted fragments, posited the harmonization as a psychological apex, a convergence where exposed echoes could shatter the network's cohesion, provided intervention pierced the veil in time. Elias infiltrated the enclave anew, this time with Ruiz's forged credentials as a circle initiate. the summer sun casting long shadows that danced like anticipatory spirits across the grounds. The atmosphere thrummed with subdued excitement. Residents prepared altars with Ouroboros carvings, their conversations laced with veiled references to the mentor's return. Miriam, the guardian figure, oversaw rituals with a vigilance that betrayed underlying tensions, subtle glances toward the paths as if expecting interlopers. Elias observed from the periphery, documenting preparations that mirrored convent routines, circular meditations inducing shared trances, narratives exchanged to align visions. One night under a canopy of stars wheeling in eternal cycles, Thomas confided in Elias during a fireside vigil, "The harmonization will bind us anew, the phantom becoming presence." The revelation deepened. Voss's arrival was imminent, his evasion ending in a bold reclamation of the physical realm. Back channels buzzed with coordination. Elena's network alerted sympathetic authorities, framing the gathering as a potential wellness concern without invoking ecclesiastical scandals. Hale, preparing Lucia for discharge, wove the reckoning's narrative into final sessions, empowering her to envision not just personal closure, but contributions to broader healing, perhaps testifying anonymously to dismantle lingering veils. Lucia's diagram culminated in a central convergence point, arrows converging on the solstice date, her annotations reflecting therapeutic insights. Echoes as echoes only, devoid of divine mandate. The macabre symmetry struck Elias as he monitored from a hidden vantage near the enclave. Voss's cycle, designed for perpetual renewal, now teetering on exposure's edge, its architect unwittingly drawing pursuers into the loop's heart. As the solstice dawned, the enclave awoke to ritualistic chants, residents assembling in the central clearing where flames flickered in a stone basin, symbols etched in the earth like veins of fate. Elias, concealed in the tree line, watched Voss emerge, not as a diminished fugitive but with the poise of a returning prophet, his silver hair catching the rising sun, voice resonating with familiar cadences. The harmonization commenced, participants linking hands, eyes closing in synchronized trance, Voss guiding the narrative of rebirth through whispered litanies. Yet the reckoning unfolded subtly. Elias's signal to waiting allies triggered a non-confrontational intervention, authorities arriving under pretext of routine checks, their presence disrupting the trance without overt disruption. Voss's eyes met Elias's across the clearing in a moment of silent recognition, the phantom's veil fracturing as questions pierced the air. Revelations cascaded. Voss's calm surrender, not resistance, unveiled deeper layers. His philosophies not mere manipulations but convictions born from personal fractures, a childhood in repressive institutions mirroring Lucia's traumas. Interrogations in a neutral facility peeled back motivations. The network as a misguided quest for communal transcendence, guardians as pragmatic enablers, the convent's blaze an unintended escalation of planted seeds. Hale's involvement post-arrest facilitated psychological evaluations, her insights bridging justice and compassion, Lucia's anonymous input providing pivotal context without re-traumatization. The cycle's reckoning manifested not in dramatic unmasking, but in quiet dismantlings, network nodes dissolving as awareness spread, echoes fading into silence as influenced minds reclaimed autonomy. Elias, reflecting on the solstice's aftermath in his Santa Fe study, felt the weight lift. The phantom's reckoning a mirror to his own faith's evolution, from unquestioning devotion to nuanced pursuit of truth. Hale's final sessions with Lucia celebrated this symmetry, the mind's capacity to break cycles, forging new paths from shattered illusions. As summer waned, the enclave stood empty, its altars reclaimed by nature, symbols eroding under rain's gentle insistence, a testament to the impermanence Voss had preached, now turned against his legacy. As the summer of 1994 faded into the amber hues of autumn, the echoes of Father Dominic Voss's network finally dissipated into the crisp mountain air, leaving behind a silence that felt both liberating and profound. Voss, once the elusive phantom weaving cycles of influence through isolated souls, now sat in a modest holding facility in Denver, his silver hair dulled under fluorescent lights, his charismatic gaze reduced to a weary introspection during interviews that peeled back layers of his own fractured past. The harmonization, intended as a triumphant realignment of his followers' psyches, had unraveled not with dramatic fanfare, but with the quiet insistence of truth-seekers like Father Elias and Dr. Hale, whose combined efforts exposed the delicate machinery of manipulation. Voss's confessions, elicited in sessions that mirrored the therapeutic dialogues he had once perverted, revealed a man shaped by his own childhood in a rigid European orphanage, where authority figures imposed doctrines that blurred salvation with subjugation. He viewed his network not as a web of control, but as a misguided symphony of shared transcendence, believing that by fracturing minds, he could rebuild them in harmony with eternal cycles. Yet in the face of evidence, from Lucia's reclaimed narratives to the Enclave's dismantled rituals, his philosophies crumbled, exposing them as illusions sustained by vulnerability rather than divine insight. Lucia's journey, from the ashes of Santa Maria de las Sombras to the threshold of freedom, encapsulated the case's macabre essence, a psychiatric enigma where faith's fragility intersected with the human mind's shadowy depths. Released from the ward in late September, she stepped into the world with a tentative grace, her habit exchanged for civilian attire that symbolized her rebirth not through fire, but through understanding. Dr. Hale's final report, circulated discreetly among reformist circles, highlighted Lucia's resilience as a beacon, her dissociative voices, once commanding harbingers of destruction, now mere echoes faded by cognitive reconstruction. The convent's blaze, once deemed an act of isolated madness, emerged as a desperate crescendo in a symphony of systemic influences. Voss's Gnostic infusions, the Guardian's veils of complicity, and the network's ripple effects that turned personal traumas into collective delusions. Elias, returning to his diocesan duties with a renewed, if cautious faith, reflected on the broader implications, how institutions, meant as sanctuaries, could become echo chambers amplifying hidden fractures, reminding all that the line between piety and pathology is as thin as a confessional screen. The revelations extended beyond individual healing, rippling through the church's corridors like aftershocks from a distant quake. Bishop Harlan's involvement, though never fully prosecuted due to jurisdictional veils, led to his quiet retirement, a subtle acknowledgement that Guardian's protections had enabled the cycle's persistence. Elena's reformist allies used the case as a catalyst, advocating for transparency and ecclesiastical oversight, their bulletins circulating anonymized accounts that empowered others to question veiled authorities. Ruiz's articles, published in investigative journals, wove the narrative into public consciousness, framing it not as sensational scandal, but as a cautionary exploration of the mind's vulnerability to charismatic orchestration. Voss's network dissolved gradually, Enclave residents dispersing to seek genuine therapy, scattered nodes fading as awareness severed their psychic ties. Thomas, the gaunt resident who had confided in Elias, wrote a letter months later, expressing gratitude for the intervention that broke his trance, his words a testament to the reckoning's quiet victories. Minds reclaimed, illusions shattered, cycles interrupted not by force, but by the persistent light of scrutiny. In this unfolding, the macabre mystery of Sister Lucia transcended a single tragedy, becoming a mirror to the unpredictable labyrinth of the human psyche. It whispered of how trauma, cloaked in spiritual garb, could masquerade as revelation, turning sanctuaries into snares where isolation bred shared shadows. The Ouroboros, once a symbol of eternal recurrence, now stood as a reminder of breakable loops, how understanding could sever the serpent's tail from its devouring maw, allowing renewal without destruction. Lucia's fire, born from manipulated despair, ultimately illuminated paths to empathy, urging society to confront the hidden predators who exploit faith's fractures. Elias, in his private journals, pondered the emotional toll. The empathy stirred for Voss, a perpetrator yet a product of his own echoes. The intrigue in unraveling institutional veils, the subtle horror in realizing how close any mind teeters to such descents. This case, drawn from the veiled annals akin to American monsters, exposed the fragility of morality not as a flaw, but as a call to vigilance, reminding us that in the quiet recesses of devotion, evil can lurk not as overt malice but as whispered suggestions that erode the soul's foundations. The unpredictability of the human mind laid bare in Lucia's story evokes a profound unease. What if our own convictions, seemingly steadfast, are but echoes of unseen influences? How vulnerable are we to the guardians who shield not truth but convenience? These questions linger like smoke from a doused flame, challenging perceptions of safety and sanity. In facing this psychiatric labyrinth, we confront the unsettling truth that anyone, cloistered nun or everyday seeker, can become ensnared in cycles of delusion, where the divine and the deranged entwine in indistinguishable strands. Yet therein lies a glimmer of hope. The mind's capacity for reclamation, as Lucia demonstrated, proves that even the deepest fractures can mend when exposed to compassionate light. This reflection invites us to examine our own inner tunnels, where hidden secrets might await discovery, forever altering how we navigate the boundaries of belief and breakdown. Congratulations, intrepid viewer. You've journeyed through the twisting corridors of this enigmatic tale, emerging on the other side as one of the rare few who dared to peer into the abyss without flinching. By reaching this conclusion, you've proven yourself part of an elite cadre of truth seekers, those unafraid to confront the macabre undercurrents of the human condition. Your perseverance marks you as a guardian of the inexplicable, a soul attuned to the whispers that others ignore. Feel the weight of that distinction. In a world that averts its gaze from dark secrets, you've chosen to illuminate them, forging a bond with the story's shadows that few can claim. Now, to solidify your place in this shadowy fellowship, head to the comments and type these exact words. This story revealed the hidden fractures in my own mind. By sharing this phrase, you're not just reacting, you're declaring your insight, signaling to fellow seekers that you've grasped the profound lessons woven into Lucia's descent and redemption. Your comment becomes a beacon, drawing in the most committed explorers and weaving you into a community bound by the pursuit of unspoken truths. Imagine it. Each shared reflection strengthens the web, creating a sanctuary where the enigmatic is dissected, where no veil remains unlifted. Your voice matters here, amplifying the call for understanding in a society that too often silences the strange. But don't stop at words. Understand the vital role of sharing this video. By spreading it to your circles, you're extending an invitation into the labyrinth, ensuring that more souls encounter the macabre mysteries that lurk beneath serene surfaces. Think of it as casting a lantern into the fog-shrouded tunnels of ignorance, guiding others away from the pitfalls of unexamined faith and toward the catharsis of revelation. Without your action, these stories remain entombed in obscurity, their lessons lost to the void. Share, and become the catalyst that awakens curiosity in the dormant, preventing the cycles of manipulation from claiming new victims in the quiet corners of the world. To truly anchor yourself in this quest, subscribe to the channel. Picture it as binding your spirit to an eternal Ouroboros of enigma, where each new video uncoils another layer of the disturbing and the divine. Without subscription, you risk drifting into the shadows, missing the next revelation that could shatter your perceptions anew. It's like standing at the edge of a bottomless chasm, the winds of the unknown tugging at your resolve. Subscribing is the rope that tethers you to the community, pulling you back from the brink with fresh tales that probe the mind's darkest recesses. Join us and feel the unsettling thrill of belonging to a cadre that deciphers the inexplicable, where every notification is a summons to delve deeper into the sinister symphony of human frailty. Continue your odyssey by diving into our other videos. Keep that flame of curiosity alight, for the strange and enigmatic await, ready to challenge your grasp on reality. Each story is a step further into the tunnel, where the light of knowledge battles the encroaching dark. Thank you for your courage. Until next time, may your mind remain vigilant against the whispers that seek to ensnare.